Salam and peace, everyone. Welcome to another episode of My Voice's Race Against Racism, where we take a deep dive into the racial injustices and discrimination against Black people in North America. This show is brought to you by My Voice Canada, a platform for the youth and by the youth. I'm your co-host, Mashaal. You're muted.
Hi, I'm Hamza, the other co-host for today's video. A little bit about me. I'm 22, having been raised mostly in the suburbs of Brampton, potentially the most brown place in Canada. And for the past couple years, I've been a political studies major at Queen's University in Kingston, potentially the most white university in Canada. I'm super excited to be part of this project, and hopefully we'll be able to produce an informative conversation today. Michelle, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself and introduce our guest?
Certainly. I'm a Toronto-based designer, and I'm the outreach director for My Voice Canada. I have an interest in agricultural economics, and that's what I look forward to studying in post-secondary. Today, we have with us Chelsea Martin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chelsea. I'm really excited to be here. I am a Drexel student. I go to school in Philadelphia, and I'm a global studies major focused on human rights and global justice. I have a minor in French and potentially Arabic, and I'm just really passionate about social justice. So thank you for having me.
That's amazing.
This episode's topic is racism in Canada. We'll be talking about the misconceptions surrounding Canada's innocence relative to anti-Black racism. We'll also be focusing on how racism manifests within the education systems of Canada and the United States, given our guest Chelsea has had experience in both American and Canadian school systems. Before we start, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
So like I mentioned, I go to Drexel University, which is a predominantly white institution in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I've lived in Toronto for most of my life, so I do have, some stories to share from up here. I'm really just passionate about social justice. I've been a fellow with Next Gen America, which is the largest youth organization in America. And yeah, I hope to pursue a career in law or politics, one or the other. And I'm just really excited to be here.
Awesome.
That's amazing. Yeah, we're really happy to have you. So to get to the heart of today's topic, Chelsea, do you think there is a demonstrable difference between how you or other BIPOC experience racism in America and Canada, and how? And by BIPOC, I'm referring to Black, Indigenous, and people of color.
Definitely. So I think that in the United States, it's very blatant and indisputable almost. Of course, everyone experiences microaggressions and whatnot, but I would say that for the most part, in Canada, the racism is very hidden. It's very, masked, where Canadians love to be politically correct. They love to, use the right terminology and, make sure that what they're saying is politically correct. They're not going to straight up call you, a racial slur, but they will. Their actions speak louder than words, essentially. And so, like, a good example of that is Amy Cooper. She was a Canadian. She knew what she was doing when she was talking to police on Christian Cooper, who is a Black man, and they're not related at all. But she knew what she was doing, calling the police on an African American man. And that's just a prime example of, a Canadian doing racial or acting out of racism. That's a prime example. In Canada, the thing that frustrates me with Canada is that we love to market ourselves as, such a multicultural, diverse haven for, people of color. But the reality is that we face racism up here, and it's not talked about ever. Our voices are constantly silenced. Our experiences are invalidated. And I'm really glad that we're having this conversation now, but it doesn't make up for the fact that years and years and years, my parents, my grandparents have even experienced worse racism than I have, but their experiences were invalidated.
Mm-hmm. So the differing social and racial contexts of the countries, they require different approaches then, right?
To a certain extent, I would say yes, because in the United States, obviously, the extent is much more evident. It's right in our faces, and the intensity is so much higher. But at the same time, what we're battling here is a system. It's a system of racism that continues to perpetuate over and over again. So yes, the way in approaching it, it might be different, but I like to say it's the same story, but just different words. The system is what continues to, continue to oppress people of color, specifically Black people here. You don't even realize the, anti-Blackness that is perpetuated in all the veins of our society until you kind of exit it and really, internalize what you've experienced. Like, I just think that Canada as a whole, it loves to just brush things under the rug, brush what happened to the Indigenous people under the rug, brush what happens to Black Canadians here under the rug, and it's not right.
Do you think this translates into how organizations differ in terms of how they operate, say Black Lives Matter, for example, how they operate in Canada versus America?
I think that Black Lives Matter in America versus Canada, when it first started, I had wanted to get involved in stuff. But I could never really find a chapter close enough to me to, really be involved and be an active member. Whereas in the States, I feel like there's multiple chapters. There's more unity in the Black community in the United States versus here. In Canada, I have felt very isolated. As a Black woman growing up in a predominantly white area, going to predominantly white schools my whole life, I felt like, there has been a lack of community here. So in terms of, mobilizing our communities and really organizing, it's hard to do that when, there's very few Black people around you, or even, really it's just hard to really create community when it feels like there isn't one, if that makes sense.
No, for sure. That totally makes sense. And maybe a more approachable question. What does this mean for the day-to-day life of a Black student in America versus Canada?
Now that's a difficult one. I would say that, my experience as a student in America versus Canada has been pretty unanimous. I would say, the racism that is in the educational system, both in the States and in Canada, is absolutely disgusting, and it needed to be said. Students are constantly gaslighted and constantly silenced for sharing their experiences or sharing, calling people out even. We're constantly held to either an extremely high standard of, really achieving and working extremely hard hours, or we're veered to, pursue athletics. That's your way out. That's your way to, achieve success and whatnot. Or you're criminalized. Like my sister in the 5th grade the teacher really thought that she was taking drugs when she was taking vitamin C. And she really humiliated her in front of the entire class and sent her to the principal's office, telling the whole class that my sister was taking drugs and whatnot, when really she was taking her vitamins. And that is what we mean. That would have never happened to a white student, ever. That never would have happened to a white student. And the fact that nothing happened with the teacher after, the principal kind of just brushed it off and said, well, make sure she takes her vitamins at home. It's just...
Make sure you take your vitamins at home? That's so messed up. Wow.
That makes no sense.
Yeah, it doesn't at all. I just feel like on a macro level, I can't really speak to the American school system per se, in high school or elementary school, as I didn't grow up there. But, I think that schools as a whole have a really, really big job of restructuring and reforming their curriculums and, really pushing the idea that anti-Black racism is not okay at all. It should never, ever, ever be tolerated. And, I hope that with all these protests going on, that is something that they take into consideration and really focus on implementing, because students shouldn't have to go through that. Students shouldn't have to be, put on such a double standard all the time. It's not right.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what's central to this conversation is the notion of gaslighting. Do you have any experiences that you can share on that?
Yes. 100%.
Yes.
Now it happens so many times that you don't even realize sometimes that you were gaslighted until after you're like,
Yeah.
you just really said that to me. But like with friends, for example, if I were to say, oh, you know, I didn't like the way they were talking to me, like they were definitely treating me differently, or don't you think it's weird that they served me last over you guys? And it's like, well, I mean, you don't know that. Like, you don't know. Maybe it was just like a coincidence. Maybe not. And that happens on a daily basis where, like, especially here, where it's just like, you don't even want to share your experience anymore because you don't want to feel guilty for saying anything. And then in schools, it's like to an even greater degree. I remember in the 11th grade, I was doing a project on police brutality, specifically the Devontae Miller case. And for those of you who don't know, that was the case where Devontae was brutally beat by two police officers. This is in Canada. Two police officers who were off duty. They beat him with a metal pipe, and he lost his eye. And the real part that I had pointed out about in the class was that their father actually worked for the police, and they worked in the professional standards unit. And that unit is what notifies the SIU to pursue an investigation. And the thing was that the PSU did not notify the SIU at all. So I was pointing out the fact that, you know, this is corruption within the police system here in Canada. And the teacher really, they did not like the fact that I said that at all. And their main goal was to really just kind of shut down the idea that, like, the police were corrupt in any way possible. It was, are you sure? Are you just speculating? Are you making, like, in front of the entire class, to the point where I was just like, you know what, let me just drop it. I'm not gonna continue to like argue with you anymore, but these are the facts of what happened. So gaslighting happens all the time.
And like, just to like generally like cover it, I guess, what has your experience in the Canadian school system been like?
That I think I can speak for most students of color, specifically Black students, when I say that it's been poor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I said, I've been in predominantly white institutions. That's like at the TCDSB, that's the school board I attended. But it was just bad. You know, I didn't realize the extent of the anti-Blackness that was perpetuated until I had graduated and was really like, wow, like I could actually internalize everything that had happened to me within what specifically high school was really, really interesting. But school, you know, just as a whole, the curriculum needs to be restructured. For one thing, the history element completely whitewashed, which is not surprising at all. I'm sure American schools can say the same thing. But completely whitewashed. You learn about how the Europeans can come to Canada, and you learn about New France and New England and the British North America. You don't learn about how, you know, indigenous people were slaves. Then Black people became slaves up here. You don't hear about that at all. Then you also don't hear about the egregious acts done to these people and to us over time that is just like appalling. You really just have to sit with yourself and think like, wow, what they taught me was not the truth at all. And then also going off of that is like, we learned about Black history briefly, very briefly at my schools at least. We learned about, you know, Martin Luther King, we learned about Rosa Parks, we learned about the civil rights movement, but it wasn't to the extent of what it should have been. It was, you know, Martin Luther King said his I Had a Dream speech. Rosa Parks sat down, they marched, and then they got their rights. It wasn't any of the other aspects of it at all, which is horrendous to me. How are you not teaching people the real history? Then another thing is Black Canadians, we don't even know our history. Like that was not taught at all. There was no, like I hadn't even heard of Viola Desmond until about the 11th grade when there was talk of her getting on the $10 bill here. Prior to that, I had no idea about anything. I had no idea about, the Black people in Nova Scotia, nothing. And there's deep history there. There's deep history there that's not even talked about. We didn't learn about segregation here. We learned about it in the States. And that's something that Canada loves to do. Like, let's just divert it to the States. We're not like the States. We don't have slavery. We're not like the States. We didn't have segregation. We don't have horrible police brutality. That's Canada's like go-to line. Like, we're not the States. But the reality is, are we any better because we're concealing all this stuff? Like, we don't really know what's happening here, to be honest. And it's really just appalling to me. Then, you have teachers, right? You have teachers who are supposed to educate their students and treat all their students with respect and equally, as they should be. And that's not the case at all. Like I said, there's a double standard of, you have to do above and beyond just to even be considered equal to your white peers, or you're criminalized by your teachers. You're seen as, the kid who's always sent to the principal's office and just straight up bullied sometimes. Like, my 4th grade teacher really was really, really brutal. Like, people loved her for her old school fashion, like her old school style of teaching, but she really would dump kids' desks out and force them to clean up their desk on their own. She made it seem like I was criminalized by her. Me and my friend were texting in the bathroom at one point, and she really held me after school for 2 hours just to yell at me to seem like I was taking pictures of other girls in the bathroom and sending it to them, or sending it to other people, which is absolutely disgusting. Why would you think that a 4th grader would ever even think to do something like that? And it's just countless stories like that, but it's also the little microaggressions that you face every single day. The backhanded compliments. Oh, you're actually really, really smart. Or you're pretty for a Black girl. Or, oh, can I touch your hair? And then, make a comment after. It's just like continuously this cycle of, perpetuating racism, and it's accepted by teachers. It's accepted. Like, even when high school was really just crazy to me because it was interesting to see how Blackness was even looked at my school. When I first started in the 9th grade, students were just saying the most racist things ever. Calling people, if girls had their hair in braids, calling them Medusa or, the Avatar. Then, just literally saying the N-word with no regard whatsoever. And these are not Black students. These are students of color and white students. Then, as Black culture becomes more trendy, right? You have students who are not Black really just appropriating the heck out of Black culture. They're showing up in do-rags. They're saying the N-word and rapping, thinking that it's cool or whatever. And you're just like at a loss for words. Well, at least I was, because I'm like, I'm surrounded by a bunch of white students. I already feel isolated. And then to have to go the next mile to say, hey, what you're doing is not right, which I did. And then to be gaslighted, it's just like this repetitive cycle of, okay, so they want me to be quiet. Okay, they want me to be quiet. Oh, they want me to be quiet. And I just feel like as a whole, I really, really hope that the TCDSB and the TDSB and honestly any other school district in Canada really works on instilling that anti-Black racism is not at all okay. Not at all. Because that stuff really sticks with people. And had I really internalized all of the stuff that was said to me, within those 4 years at high school, I don't know that I would have been as successful as I was. I don't know if I would have had the capacity to care about my grades, about, really pursuing my dreams, had I allowed all those comments, had I allowed all those teachers who are telling you, oh, don't go into this, oh, maybe you should pursue something else, oh, you're not, maybe you shouldn't be an AP. All those things add up, and it really affects people's lives, and it's stunting people. It's stunting their success, and it's not right.
Yeah, 100%. You just brought up like the main problem with anti-racism in the Canadian school system is the fact that, as you mentioned, black students being streamlined away from academics. Then the other thing is the suspensions and just like criminalization of young black students from an early age, and which holds no basis. And then I think the main thing is the first step that we should be taking is the underrepresentation of a diverse school staff. Like I've been doing a bit of research and studies, and I looked into the Peel District School Board, which is one of the most diverse school boards in Canada, and we found a huge discrepancy between in the percentage of racialized teachers and staff as opposed to students. Apparently, 25% of the staff are racialized compared to 83% of racialized students. Basically, the demographic of the school staff is opposite that of the student body. Do you think it's important for BIPOC to be in these positions?
100%. Because it starts with, the school board, it starts with the faculty, it starts with, really having, BIPOC a part of this picture, a part of the table, who helped shape our curriculum, who helped teach us. I didn't have one black teacher at all as a student in the TCDSB. My first black teacher was actually this year at university, which is insane to me. Another thing is, like, we aren't taught with using like black authors or, black artists, there's no kind of diversity within what we're being taught, and it's telling. It's very telling. So I definitely think that representation does matter, because it's teachers with these experiences, and it's people on the board with these experiences who are able to, use their voices and help create a more equitable community within the school and within the school board.
That's a really good answer. Yeah, definitely. I 100% agree with you. And you touched on this earlier, but like generally speaking, I would totally agree that curriculums are whitewashed to all heck. But the question that I have is, do you think that the degree of this whitewashing differs between Canadian and American schools?
No.
Really?
I mean, I haven't taken like a history course in the United States, but what I can say is that what we were taught in the TCDSB is not nearly what happened in reality.
Mm-hmm.
And, I really can't speak to what was taught, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's at the same level to that of the United States.
Mm-hmm. But Canada is so like politically correct, right? Like you mentioned, it's tough when that narrative is running because Canada gets this shield from respectability politics and fake positive optics.
Right. Definitely. I mean, that's Canada's go-to. I don't know, like, they love the positive optics, and we do this, and we have this, and we have this program and that program. But reality is, the system behind all of those programs and who's running it is still through a very white lens. That's how I would put it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, like popular opinion is that Canada is a paradise compared to the United States, the land of freedom that the Underground Railroad led to. No slavery, but as you said, that's just half the story, right, Chelsea?
Yeah, exactly. Like, slavery did happen here, as I mentioned earlier. Segregation happened here. Now, I don't think I don't know that there wasn't really a civil rights movement here, but it's almost as if we're at this like post-racial state in Canada where everyone's just like, what? Why are you talking about racism? That's done. Like, we don't have that here anymore. But the reality is we do. Our experiences have just been silenced for so long that you guys don't want to hear it. But now we're having this dialogue, and I think that it's really important for us to, really assert ourselves and say, this is happening and this needs to change immediately.
Yeah, 100%. What I just want to add to your point, Chelsea, is that yeah, the idea of like, oh, there wasn't any slavery or even no segregated schools here, but that's actually wrong. I mean, like many provinces such as Ontario, Quebec, and Nova Scotia had segregated schools until 1977 when the Canadian Human Rights Act when the Canadian Human Rights Act was passed, and these practices began to change. And the last segregated school closed in 1983, just in Nova Scotia, outside Halifax and Lincolnville. So, yeah, this is definitely something in our history as well.
And even contemporarily speaking, now, despite the subtlety or polite facade of Canadian racism, we've recently seen how blatant racism thrives at an institutional level, by which, of course, I'm referring to how NDP leader Jagmeet Singh was expelled from the House of Commons. Have you read about that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I did hear about that. And, I think it's just a prime example, again, of the extent of systemic racism here. The fact that he was, kicked out of the House of Commons for calling out racist action, kind of telling of the systematic racism that's here. The fact there has been studies proven that the RCMP does, typically have higher cases that involve or end in death with Indigenous and Black people. And now the fact that he was kicked out for highlighting that is almost like that's the prime example of the silencing. That is exactly what we mean when Black voices and people of color are silenced on a constant basis, and we can even see that at that high level.
Which again just makes me say, like, thank you for having this conversation and like expending the energy and time to educate us and everyone watching. Really appreciate it.
Of course, this was a great opportunity. Before we go, I do just want to say that I know what we talked about was very, heavy and whatnot, but the thing is that we need to be hopeful and that we need to work on, really creating change. And how we do that is education. Educate yourselves, read, watch documentaries, keep signing those petitions, keep protesting, but also reflect. There's no point in doing all of those things without really reflecting and thinking, okay, what biases do I have and how can I unlearn them? This is a process of learning and unlearning, and it takes commitment. It's not just a week of let me post on Instagram, let me, hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag Blackout Tuesday. This is deeper than that. This is so much deeper than that. And you really need to, the way that you really want to change is to start with yourself, number one. Learn, educate, listen to, your Black peers, your friends who, experience racism. Really listen to their stories and experiences and see how you can help. And lastly, like, accountability is so important. I think that, there's no issue with holding people to higher standards of really just treating people like people and treating people with respect. And so that also means holding yourself accountable. Where are you putting your money? What companies are you supporting? Are you calling out people when there are no people of color in the room? That is what's important. And yeah, that's really just all I have to say. Thank you for having me on this. It was really great to meet you both. And yeah.
Just quickly before we go, could you? So you're the co-founder of Toronto's Manifesto. Could you just tell us a little bit about that initiative?
Of course. So Toronto's Manifesto is a page that my friends and I created. It's all about uplifting and amplifying the Black voice and supporting the Black community here in Canada. We're literally just giving so many educational resources, health and wellness resources. But the real key to our page is just sharing the experiences of Black people here. We take like anonymous DM submissions, and then we're going to be sharing those stories on our pages. But yeah, it's really great. Like, we're really excited, and it's really, I think what we're doing is really, really important with it.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, for joining us. We really appreciate you sharing your insights and your experiences with us. I'd just like to give a big shout out to Starts With One Canada. They are an organization based out of Mississauga that aims to improve the access to quality education for Canadian youth and families. At the moment, they're running this cool initiative called Black Students Matter, and where they're advocating against anti-Black racism in the Peel District School Board specifically. So we've linked their website in the description box below. So definitely check that out, and over there you'll find resources on ways you can contribute to tackle this issue. Also, one last thing: Happy National Indigenous Peoples Day. And check out My Voice's Instagram. We have a whole week highlighting facts about Indigenous history, historical figures, and culture. So check it out. Thank you so much for tuning in. To help us create more awareness, please share this episode and subscribe to our YouTube channel for upcoming ones, and follow us on all our social media platforms in My Voice Canada. Thank you. Peace.